It sure is nice to come home at the end of a long day and enjoy a podcast. But you know what makes the experience that much better? Relaxing with a few puffs of smoke from my McQueen pipe. At McQueenPipes.com, I was able to find the perfect smoking pipe to suit my nerdy, yet dignified sensibilities. I especially love that each pipe is designed and handcrafted by a true artisan, and that all of their pipes are inspired by fantasy books and movies like The Lord of the Rings. Being a bit of a hobbit myself, my pipe is called the Barrel Rider, but they've also got pipes for wizards, rangers, dragon riders, or even goblins. If pipe tobacco isn't your thing, no worries. McQueen Pipes has got you covered with attachments for vaping or even cannabis. Head on over to McQueenPipes.com and use the code BIOGRAPHERS at checkout to receive 15% off of your entire order. Go ahead, treat your nerdy heart to something you'll cherish and enjoy your podcast listening experience in style with a McQueen pipe. That's Mac like mac and cheese and Queen like the band. McQueenPipes.com and use the code BIOGRAPHERS at checkout for a 15% discount on your whole order. Cheers, everyone, and happy podcasting.
I do hope you can see me today from where you are.
Ich bin ein Lily.
If I'm generally anything, I guess I'm generally miserable. This modern world of science and invention is of particular interest to women.
The people, I would say, there is no patent. Would you patent the sun?
I regard myself as a soldier, though a soldier of peace.
Welcome to the Biographers.
One slip up and I almost ate kosher food when I was 8 years old.
Non-kosher food?
Yeah, non-kosher food. My mom made Polish sausages and didn't check to see if it was pork. And I remember smelling it. And as a kid who had grown up Orthodox, like properly Orthodox, no light on Fridays, I remember having a severe sense of panic. I yelled, I smelled it, and I was like, I can't eat this. And I yelled, I was like, pork! And my mom
has a cloven hoof!
And my mom was like running down the stairs as if like there's a bomb in the house. But then after my parents divorced, we moved to Colorado. And Colorado, for those of you who don't know, has almost no Jewish population. There are some Jews in Denver. And all of those combined have been able to accumulate one kosher grocery store. So unless you're ordering your food online or are vegan, being kosher is pretty much out of your options. And then also on top of that, my stepdad, Julio, was Cuban, so it was all pork chops and fried rice all the time, and maybe congri, which is like it's rice with black beans. They also call it cristianos y moranos.
Oh, yes, I've had that before.
Then, like, I think my Jewish gallbladder started to develop as I got older, and like I can drink. Or I could have greasy food, but I cannot have both. And pork is like just so greasy that even just having a little bit of bacon, my stomach is churning.
Oh, so that one time I brought you Santiago's and they only had bacon burritos.
I ate it because I love you, homie.
Oh, well, I appreciate
but
you.
I was bent over for the rest of the day.
I forgot, honestly. It was like when I got those burritos, I was like, yeah, I want them with chorizo or whatever. And then they were like, we only have bacon. And I was like, well, I don't want to show up empty-handed. So I just was like,
chicken sandwich
get a couple of these or whatever. So.
Yesterday. Or 2 days ago at the coffee shop, and I ate it, and it doesn't feel good.
Oh, well,
it's
I'm
just
sorry.
Jew stomach. It's just what happens. It's a real thing. If you're Ashkenazi, which I am, a European Jew, I
thought you were Sephardic.
Culturally Sephardic, but I took a DNA test.
Okay.
I thought I was Sephardic because the Jewish side of my family is from Italy, right? So there's a 50-50 chance that you're Sephardic or Ashkenazi because it's close to some of the Spanish-speaking countries. And during the Inquisition, a lot of the Spanish-speaking Jews moved to Italy. We're always just kind of pinballing from European country after
just getting pushed out everywhere, basically.
The first diaspora. So we thought we were Sephardic, but I took a DNA test, and I'm like, actually like 50% just straight Ashkenazi Jew.
Oh, there you go.
So I come with all of the stomach issues with that. So
well, fun.
Yeah, instead of like pita bread and fried rice and like all this delicious Ladino food, I was just, like I said, kippers and pickled cabbage.
Well, fun. Well, hey, everyone. Welcome to The Biographers. I'm Daniel Newman, and with me is Akiva Miola.
Hello.
Who is just finding out now that he's half Ashkenazi?
Ashkenazi.
I always want to say Azerkenazi. I don't know why, but
Yeah,
it's
Ashki. You can say Ashki.
Ashki. Okay, I feel like I gotta staple that into my brain. Well, we'll get going on our episode in just a second here. Couple of announcements first before we get started. First and foremost, if you are a fan of the show so far, and hopefully you are if you're listening right now, I would ask...
If you aren't, too bad.
You will be soon, hopefully. But I will ask if anybody is able to, if you got the means, we are looking for some support right now. We'd love to turn this into a full-time gig. Right now, we are doing this pro bono out of the goodness of our hearts for you people.
Mm-hmm.
So if you do have a couple of bucks to spare, we'd really appreciate the support. If you could just go to our Patreon page, that's going to be patreon.com/thebiographies.
Yeah.
Right now, we've got a couple of tiers that are just, quite honestly, support tiers. They're just saying, hey, thanks for doing some good work, but we do plan on getting some actual bonus content / incentives sort of soon. The next thing is that we are going to be starting up a Kickstarter very soon here. So that's, again, just going to be to support the endeavor and to push us moving forward. That's going to be kickstarter.com/profile/thebiographers. So any support there would help as well. Right now, we are making almost no money. We have a couple Patreon supporters. We've got a little bit coming in from some paid advertising.
But you guys are the best. When I go to bed, I think of you. Not in a weird way.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.
Maybe in
the
a weird way. It depends on if you appreciate that.
But with that, take it away, Akiva.
All right. So in the last episode of Leonardo da Vinci, we covered the first few years Da Vinci departs from Milan, back to the city where he was trained, Florence. A lot changed since he returned. Lorenzo de' Medici died, which led to a power vacuum that allowed a modesty cult to flourish, which was later destroyed by the people who became sick of their preacher's antics. When Da Vinci returns, he makes Virgin of the Yarnwinder for a friend of the King of France, Robert Tet, dodges the requests of Isabella d'Este, who thinks she's too fat in everybody's portraits, and is called upon by the wildly infamous Cesare Borgia. In the short period that Da Vinci worked for Borgia, he was given the title of Engineer General, making maps and strengthening fortresses, along with becoming friends with a young Niccolò Machiavelli. After a harrowing encounter where Cesare chokes the life out of one of Da Vinci's good friends, he immediately leaves his service with Machiavelli in tow. Machiavelli, my apologies. The two work for Florence to try to reroute the Arno River, only to have an idiot engineer ruin their plans, flooding acres of farmland and not moving the Arno an inch. Around the same time that Da Vinci was putting the final touches on his master plan to steal the Arno, Leonardo would be commissioned to paint a subject that he had spent the last year becoming pretty acquainted with: war.
Ooh.
Yeah. So, the painting was called the Battle of Anghiari, and in 1504, the Signoria, Florence's version of a lord, commissioned it. So, at this point, it was sort of a republic, and then the preachers came in, kind of ruined everything, and now they're kind of republic, kind of not, and the head honcho of their government is called the Signoria.
Okay.
He commissioned the Battle of Anghiari. While it didn't last the tides of time, just like Adoration of the Magi, other artists would refuse for his work to die, making extremely in-depth copies, with the best coming from Peter Paul Rubens about 100 years after Da Vinci would start on it.
Oh, I know Rubens. Wasn't he super famous for doing the what's called cross-hatching? If you remember?
I want to say so. Cross-hatching was already... Da Vinci did cross-hatching as well.
I know, but I want to say that Rubens was like a master of it. I feel like when I went to the J. Paul Getty Museum in Los Angeles, they had a Rubens exhibit, and he had a bunch of that. But anyways,
I didn't get too far into Rubens, but he just sounds like he has a way more contemporary name than like 1600s. But
I mean, regardless, he makes a great sandwich.
Yeah, I would agree. To describe what we have left of the painting, we see a depiction of soldiers on horseback, dressed in partial plate armor and cloth gambesons adorned with jewels. A gambeson, if you don't know, is a multi-layered cloth, kind of like what the Witcher wears.
Oh, okay.
On the left, we see a Milanese general on horseback twisting to wrench a standard or battle flag out of his enemy's hands, wearing armor adorned with seashell-like decorations. Next to him are two cavalrymen with their horses rearing up. The front limbs are tangled together. The riders atop them are swinging falchions, which are curved swords, kind of similar to a scimitar. They're really popular at this time. If you've ever done any fencing, they're very fun to play with.
I've always pronounced them as falchions.
Well, that's very fancy of you.
I don't know.
Maybe they are. I just say
don't
falchion.
know. I trust you because you're the sword and knife guy. So.
Yeah. Now, below in the painting, we see total chaos. To the right, a soldier lies in a pool of his own blood, waiting for the killing blow from a man holding a dagger above him, and another raises his shield to the horses in the hopes of not being trampled. If you were a Florentine citizen when Da Vinci was painting this, the first thing you would notice about the painting was that it was massive, even more massive than The Last Supper. While The Last Supper was around 30 feet wide, Anghiari was commissioned to take up nearly twice the size in the meeting chamber for Florence's Palazzo Vecchio. Machiavelli's secretary and cousin of Amerigo Vespucci would give in-depth coverage of the battle he was to depict, which was a fight between Florence and Milan involving 40 squadrons of cavalry and 2,000 foot soldiers back in 1440, 12 years before Da Vinci was born.
Dang. Dude. So this painting, I got it pulled up right here, is about 30 feet high, if I remember correctly, because I think you said that the Last Supper was like 12 feet high?
I want to say that it's around the same height. It's about 13 feet tall, but it's 57 feet long.
Jeez, man.
This depiction by Peter Paul Room is only just a portion that was the most finished, which is the depiction of the General of Milan holding fervently onto the standard, which is like the battle flag of their city, while the Florentines are fighting him and trying to rip it out from him.
So first of all, for anybody that does want to see this image, we are going to have this up on our website, thebiographerspodcast.com. But I think the most striking thing about this is that it feels like, so I'm looking at how the horses are almost blending together in this weird way that they start to look almost homogenous.
Yeah.
And it feels, look, I've never seen war, but I can only imagine it, right? Mm-hmm. And especially these old battles, which were just brutal and up close and in each other's face, to where if you were watching it from afar, I feel like this painting gives that impression where everything is literally bleeding together. It just feels like a blob of chaos.
Yeah.
That's how I see this.
It almost kind of, in a very much more serious way, reminds me of just like in cartoons when they have the dust pile and there's like things being thrown in and out of it. And actually, Da Vinci writes a lot about dust kicking up from these horses because he was there with Cesare when Cesare was invading like everyone. So he had very in-depth personal first-person knowledge of how these fights were going on because he saw them just not even a year ago.
And also, might I recommend for anybody that is curious on seeing a very unromantic look at medieval warfare, I'd highly recommend checking out a Netflix movie called The King.
Yes.
It's got Timothy Chalamet Ding Dong in there, so he's for all you fans out there, you can watch Timmy do his thing.
Yeah.
And it is... blunt is the most accurate way I can describe how they depict battles.
Yeah.
It's not glamorous. It is not people fencing and ting, 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 swords and shields and blocking. It is just this brutal, people getting literally suffocated in piles of mud because they're in 100 and some odd pounds of armor and people are just walking over them.
There's no treads on your shoes. They're all leather soled, so if you're walking on mud, there's really strong chance of slipping. And
yeah, it was just nasty to watch.
It was gnarly. As somebody who practiced HEMA, which is historical European martial arts, so training with longsword, spear, glaive, that type of thing, I think The King gives a pretty solid depiction of what to expect in combat. If you guys haven't looked up HEMA, historical European martial arts, I would also highly recommend it because the whips and flips and flourishes of Game of Thrones is very interesting, but almost has zero historical basis. And there are tons of HEMA practitioners who actually choreograph fights as if they were real, like real duels. I can't remember the name of the channel. Maybe I'll add it onto the website later. Does historical reproductions of a manual by an Italian longsword fighter that Da Vinci probably would have just eclipsed. But anyway, really, really interesting stuff. Highly recommend getting into it.
Cool.
So getting back to the painting, while the Florentines regard this as a historic battle, pushing out the rule of dukes to maintain the freedom of their republic, Machiavelli believed that it was a total sham, claiming that only one person died that day. Machiavelli uses this as an example that mercenaries were terrible for a country, and instead, a ruler should train citizens to be so patriotic that they'd be willing to die for their lord. Machiavelli writes, quote, "Nor was there ever an instance of wars being carried on in an enemy's country with less injury to the assailants than this. For in so great a defeat, only one man died, and he, not from wounds inflicted by hostile weapons, instead having fallen from his horse and being trampled to death. Combatants then engaged with little danger, being nearly all mounted, covered with armor, and preserved from death whenever they chose to surrender. There was no necessity for risking their lives. Well, we're not certain that only one person died. There actually seems to be some truth to the myth. The war was conducted by mercenaries called condottieri, who worked for both Milan and Florence. These guys weren't paid based on how many they killed, but on how long they were employed. So naturally, they decided to keep the war going as long as possible.
like the HEMA people.
A little bit, yeah. Since their homies were fighting for the other side, some of these battles became closer to a sport with minimal casualties. This infuriated Machiavelli, since he thought that almost nothing was decided from a bloodless battle, and the mercenaries would still get a paycheck for what he considered minimal effort.
Hey, they figured out the system.
I was about to say, and I don't feel like nothing was decided, because after that, there were no attacks from Milan to Florence for like another 40, 50 years. So if anything, they've just found like a pacifist way to win a war, which is just like take all of the money from the two people who want to kill each other and then just choose not to kill one another.
I was going to say, it feels like with Machiavelli learning what I learned about him from the last episode, and him kind of being like, oh yes, a ruler needs to be ruthless at times and put his morals aside to make sure that he is victorious.
Yeah.
Feels like he's kind of just pissed because he's like, dude, people should have died. I should have seen arms on the floor. I should have seen decapitations. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
But it is just guys that are just like
not
having
how we
fun,
do this.
and that is not okay.
It reminds me of that thing that I saw in the news a couple of years ago of like some like really poor neighborhood deciding to trade out like all of their firearms for paintballs, and like warring gangs would like shoot each other with paintball guns and like break windows, bruise people, whatever, but they didn't kill anybody. And I remember the cops were like very upset about this.
Oh my gosh.
They're like, this isn't good either. And I was like, this is way better.
Better.
Like, I understand it's like destruction of property or whatever, and it's still a crime.
It's kind of adorable.
But it's like kind of like, it's like, oh, do you want to just like play with Nerf guns? Like a little bit.
It's like, you've seen the movie Friday, right?
Yeah.
Okay. It's one of my favorite little moments, and I'm sure it's many other people's favorites at the very end where Ice Cube's dad is talking to him about, he's like, dude, come on. Like, we don't need guns. We don't need knives. Back in the day, if you had a problem, you used your fists.
Yeah.
And everybody went home at the end of the day. And it really just feels like that's what that neighborhood was able to solve. And in a weird way, these people that were fighting for, what was it, Milan and Florence?
Yeah.
Same exact thing. They were sort of like, hey guys, if we can actually solve this problem without killing each other, kind of high fives all around.
Yeah, low-key.
Right?
Yeah, so despite the sort of historical curiosity of maybe nobody died in this fight, the Battle of Anghiari was still a source of pride for the Florentines, since they had almost never gone out into combat. And while Da Vinci was commissioned to paint a play fight by mercenaries who knew each other, he would take this opportunity to depict something he had witnessed just a few months ago, the horrors of real war. Needless to say, Da Vinci felt conflicted about battle. On one hand, he had spent 50 years dreaming up inventions for battle, and like how most guys are kind of shy to admit, he imagined the passion and the glory of it. I think deep down, every guy is a little bit like, hell yeah.
Totally.
You know, who doesn't want to go down in a fight? On the other hand, Leonardo's time with Cesare Borgia had convinced him that war was a beastly madness that brought out the worst in humanity, which I think he shows perfectly as well. To me, it kind of feels like a naive viewer would see this painting as badass and intense, whereas somebody experienced in violence would see this scene more terrifying. You know, Leonardo would begin to write a small treatise on the subject of painting war to prepare for this massive artwork, writing directions kind of like his motions of the soul, but kind of taking a dark turn with it.
And treatise?
If you remember, yeah.
Treatise is what you're saying?
Yeah, treatise. So like just a collection of volumes writing about, in the same way that in The Last Supper, he wrote about like, you know, how people behave at dinner tables and arguments and fights. And he wrote the motions of the soul, moti de anima. Anima. He kind of did the same thing with these sort of wars, writing about what you'd expect if you're painting a war scene.
Interesting.
It gets kind of dark. So he writes, quote, "If you show a man who has fallen to the ground, show the place where he'd been dragged as bloody mud. A horse will drag the body of its dead rider, leaving traces of the corpse blood in the dust and mud. Make the vanquished look pale and panic-stricken, their eyebrows raised high or knitted in grief, their faces stricken in painful lines. Some maimed warrior may be seen fallen to the earth, covering himself with a shield, while the enemy, bending over him, tries to deal him a deadly blow. There must not be a level spot that is not trampled and saturated with blood."
You know what it reminds me of? I don't know if you know this, but I can't remember if it started in the First World War or maybe even earlier. but the U.S. military has a single resident, whatever you want to call it, private, or maybe they have a different ranking or whatever, but their whole existence is to paint what is happening in military engagements. So if anybody's seen the 1,000-yard stare painting, it's from World War II, and it was from the Pacific, and it's this painting of this soldier who is giving what they call the 1,000-yard stare, where he's looking off into nothing because he's so distraught by all
completely
of the
dissociated
viciousness that's there. And the point of the artist, and it's still employed to this day, it still happens. So there's still an artist running around for the U.S. military that just does paintings to capture the actual emotion, because that's the whole logic of it. Is they're basically saying photographs can only tell us so much about battles, but if somebody is there feeling the emotion and they can portray that through art and show us what that actually feels like, that's a totally different thing.
This
is
like
exactly what this is reminding me of.
Yeah, it's like we talked about earlier. Like, a camera just shows images, but no human just looks with their eyes. And Da Vinci is showing that too, with this tangle of dust and blood, and it's graphic and it's realistic, but it also is being portrayed through the filter of a human mind who is perceiving the emotions and all of the things associated with it that a camera just doesn't do.
Yeah.
Right. So The Last Supper and the Adoration of the Magi were both intense and twisting wild poses that would inspire Baroque artists like Caravaggio, but they were limited by the context of what they were depicting. In one, baby Jesus is born, and in the other, everyone's sitting around for dinner, albeit a dramatic dinner. In the Battle of Anghiari, there is no reason for Leonardo to restrain the madness and intensity of war on horseback. Faces of fear and evil intent run across the painting, painted so dramatically. They kind of remind me of Da Vinci's caricatures. The bodies aren't just gently turning to one another. Some characters are fully contorting themselves around, pulling wildly at a staff with both hands. As much as Virgin of the Rocks, Adoration of the Magi, and The Last Supper are masterpieces, I can't help but feel like the Battle of Anghiari, if it was finished, art nerds would consider the others to be precursors to this masterpiece of wild human movement. Which I totally see. Like, if this got finished, I feel like this would be the painting that we talk about the most about Da Vinci. Like Adoration of the Magi, it has those crazy twisting poses, and people would go and visit it at the Benci household, which is Ginevra's family, and they would take inspiration from that. But with the Battle of Anghiari, this was in the middle of downtown Florence. If this got finished, I feel like this would be the thing that Da Vinci's famous for. Not the Mona Lisa, not Lady with an Ermine, not Last Supper. This feels like the magnum opus.
Interesting.
Right? It was around the time that Da Vinci was painting this that he would also have his first encounter with the new golden boy of Florence, Michelangelo di Lodovico Buonarroti Simoni.
Michelangelo being the key name there. One of the other Ninja Turtles.
As we mentioned in the last episode, before Lorenzo the Magnificent would succumb to acromegaly, he would pluck Michelangelo from one of his friend's bottegas and prepare him to be the next hot artist of Florence in Leonardo's absence. He would pluck Michelangelo from one of his friend's bottegas and prepare him to be the next hot artist of Florence in Leonardo's absence. After traveling to Rome to sculpt one of his masterpieces, the Pietà, depicting Mary mourning over Jesus' body, the boy became a national sensation.
Oh man, that's I personally don't like, let's just say, Catholic imagery of Jesus, because it's so depressing.
Oh
looking.
yeah, wildly.
But this is up there with that type of like, oh boy, that is quite the graphic Jesus on the cross you've got there, except he's off the cross and passed away, and Mary is mournfully holding him.
Yeah, it's really intense, but like, he's probably in his 20s at this point when he makes this, which is just wild, because the like, even if you look at where the hands are placed on the cloth, you can see that it presses through the cloth and that there's still folds that are bunched up around the fingers, and the way that like everything is draping over one another is just very, very accurate. So he has become a sensation. Florence, if you haven't picked up on, the second that somebody's new and hot, everybody is talking about him. This is where we're finally getting to a point where, like, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, painters become stars, painters become famous.
This sculpture reminds me a lot of the early studies that Da Vinci did at the Bottega.
Yeah, the drapery studies.
The drapery studies. That's exactly what this looks like to me. It's crazy.
Yeah, which would make sense because that's kind of something that people get trained on when they first get out of apprenticeship, and he's still fairly young. So doing something with a lot of cloth would be something that he's experienced in, because I imagine a lot of his teachers were kind of drilling that.
Sure.
Now, this could have been the time where Michelangelo would meet the kind and friendly Leonardo, now in his mid-50s, and learn from a master who would teach him the ways of discovery through friendship. But there was one problem. According to Vasari, Michelangelo had, quote, a very great disdain for Leonardo. This was also coupled with the fact that he was somewhat of a stuck-up brat. Their first recorded encounter would be when Leonardo, dressed in his favorite pink robes, was discussing a passage from Dante with his friends. When one of them turned to Leonardo to ask for his take on one of the passages, Leonardo tried to give Michelangelo the stage, asking him what he thought of the book. Michelangelo got offended by the gesture, thinking that Leonardo was mocking him for not reading it, and snapped back, saying, quote, no, explain it to yourself. You're the one who modeled a horse to be cast in bronze, was unable to do it, and had to give up in shame.
Michelangelo does not seem like a party dude like I have been told all of my life.
No, he is the opposite of that. In a later encounter, Michelangelo would pour more salt in the wound regarding the Sforza horse, saying, quote, so those idiot Milanese actually believed in you?
Dude, what a punk.
I know. The first time someone's like, oh, so what do you think about Dante, Leonardo? And Leonardo's like, I've been talking a lot. Michelangelo, what do you think? And Michelangelo's like, oh, yeah, well, your horse sucks. And what I hate, too, is like, he obviously does not know the story, because Michelangelo did make the horse and did not give up in shame. A bunch of soldiers shot it down and destroyed it.
It seems like a cocky young person thing to do versus Leonardo, who probably in turn was like, sorry, dude. And like just kind of was like, won't say that again. But if he was a younger person, would have been like, bro, do you want to step outside?
Yeah. So honestly, after hearing this, I immediately was like, I don't like Michelangelo. And apparently it's not just me.
Okay.
Michelangelo had a history of popping off on others, so much so that another young artist of his time, Pietro Torrigiano, was so sick of his shit that he punched him in the face. Torrigiano recalls the moment, writing, quote, I clenched my fist and gave him a blow on the nose so hard that I felt bone and cartilage go down like biscuit beneath my knuckles.
Oh my gosh.
Now, despite the permanently bent nose, which it would be for the rest of his life, Michelangelo would never change his ways. The way I see it, the two of them meeting would be kind of symbolic of people's approach to art in general. In one corner, there was Leonardo, openly gay, working hard in as many life skills as possible, whether it was to make friends or try new things, even if he failed. In the other corner, there was Michelangelo, the quintessential tortured artist. While Leonardo loved expensive and colorful silks, reading the works of ancient masters, and enjoying the finer things in life, Michelangelo dressed in plain, disheveled clothes, rarely removing his simple dog-skin shoes, which are one of the few remnants left behind by him.
Dog skin?
Yeah, we actually have an image if you want to pull it up. They're kind of weird.
I'm already appalled that he has dog skin. I mean, whatever. It's different times, but
it's
still
the Renaissance,
gross.
Whatever. But yeah, he was just like wear all black, like up to the collar, and then like these plain shoes, which he like almost never took off.
I hate that these shoes totally looks like something that new hipsters would start to wear.
Oh, it looks like something that you'd see at like PacSun or
honestly like Kanye West. I feel like would be walking down the runway being like, "Yo, these are my new shoes. Check them out."
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, that like hobo chic thing that's gotten really popular recently.
Totally.
Yeah. While Leonardo would teach his students that true artists should try to live in comfort, Michelangelo would spend his nights sleeping in his dirty studio, rarely bathing. Unlike Leonardo, Michelangelo was a fervent Christian, which would never allow him to come to terms with being gay the way that Leonardo did, instead forcing himself to be celibate.
Michelangelo was celibate.
Yeah, he
was. The hot new artist was not partaking in the affairs of the heart.
So much religious guilt surrounding this dude, and just like so much intense self-hatred and depression that like he was just kind of a bit of an ass to everybody, and like was kind of pushed himself way too hard and had a very intense attitude. And like whenever I see interactions between Michelangelo and other people, I'm like, dude, you're projecting. It's okay.
Yeah.
You know, just love yourself.
That's what it sounds
And that's
like.
kind of Da Vinci is kind of in that mode in his life now. He's had so many failures. He's had so many successes. He understands that the pursuit of doing something is a little bit more important than actually succeeding and like being well liked or being holy or whatever. And whereas Michelangelo is still younger, so those societal pressures I think are way harder on him.
He sounds like he's at the point where, do you know the music producer Rick Rubin?
Yeah.
I think we've talked about him in the past before, but that's like Rick Rubin's whole thing is he's like, look, man, if you're just doing your best work and pursuing that best work and continuing to pursue that best work, he's like, that's the best you can possibly hope for or aim for. And I love his whole thing, his approach to music is he goes, don't try to make something that people want because people don't know what they want.
Yeah.
That was great.
Yeah, Daniel and I are talking about that with books versus the internet recently. It's like the internet will give you anything if you ask for it, but a book will tell you things that you never asked for, and then all of a sudden that becomes your favorite thing.
Yep.
You know?
Totally.
Which is kind of what we hope to do here.
Yeah, true that.
Now, from Michelangelo's perspective, Leonardo wasn't a free-thinking, friendly guy. He was a barely devout, posh old man surrounded by adoring fans and his insufferably sassy apprentice, who was obviously his boyfriend, Salai. From Da Vinci's perspective, he was completely blindsided by the disdain coming from this smelly, albeit talented sculpturist. And talented he was. Just after his arrival to Florence, Michelangelo began working on what's arguably his most famous sculpture in the world, David. He was known to work in a paranoid, somewhat secretive state, and this was no exception. He secluded himself in his shop, carving out gigantic pieces of flawed marble until he managed to get David out. Michelangelo would reveal his masterpiece in 1504 with the sculpture being 17 feet tall. Not 24, I'm just saying. Sforza Horse was 24 feet tall.
Hey.
Michelangelo was only 17.
I've still heard it's very cool. My mom,
No, I know,
I don't know if I ever told you this, my mom grew up in, or at least for a portion of her life in Portugal.
Really?
Yeah, because my grandfather worked for IBM. He was a software or something or other. And so he decided he really wanted to take the family to Europe. Long story short, they got to go to all these great places throughout Europe, one of which was Florence. So my mom actually got to go into wherever he's hosted
so
that
jealous.
statue is, and she's told me all about it. And she said that one of her favorite things is as you walk into the building to see the statue of David, all along the walls, the walls are made out of marble. Michelangelo had carved faces into the actual walls as you walk in.
Really?
Yeah, and I don't know what the purpose of it was, if it was like practice or something like that, or if it was maybe ones
they
from a
presented
studio
it.
that they put it in there or something.
Yeah, because we'll actually talk about its first location here in a second. I don't think he added any faces at the time. Maybe they took this from his studio when he was practicing.
I wonder.
Which kind of that's the whole thing we're going to talk around. The hype around David rivaled Leonardo's fame for the Sforza Horse back in his time in Milan, and it came time to decide where Florence wanted to present the sculpture. Florentines were so divided on where it should go that it even broke out into a fight. So in order to smooth things over, the city put together a committee of artists to decide, including Leonardo da Vinci. The two most popular ideas for where to place it would be either in the center of the same plaza where Leonardo was painting the Battle of Anghiari, or tucked into a building near the plaza so the marble could be kept safe from the elements. The whole debate was like, we want to put this in the center of town because it's this big, awesome sculpture, or let's put it somewhere people will go visit the sculpture. The sculpture doesn't have to visit us. Let's keep it somewhere safe.
Okay.
Despite Da Vinci's protests, the aggressive Michelangelo would have his masterpiece placed in the center of town for all to see. Now, like I said, Da Vinci wasn't a hater, but he was just kind of sick of this kid. That's the vibe that I get from this. Like, he doesn't even write any notes about him too much, besides like critiques on his artwork, which we'll get into. There was one little debate about Michelangelo, which is the dick on Michelangelo is fairly big and very prominent. So Da Vinci was like, okay, if we're going to put him in the center of town, we have to put like a leaf over him. And everybody was like, yeah, no, that's fair. That's fair. Because like, you know, the people are going to come in and out of like courtroom sessions and just like giant phallus like 9 feet above their heads.
I have to
like,
be
that's going
honest.
to take away from like our seriousness as a city.
I don't want to summon the wrath of these cult followers, but I feel like Leonardo is looking at Michelangelo in the same way that I am currently looking at Taylor Swift. It's not that I hate her. It's that I'm just sick of her.
A little bit.
Do you know what I'm saying?
A little bit, yeah.
Again, don't hate me, everybody. It's not that I hate her, but it's also one of those things that if anybody brings up saying, I don't really care for Taylor Swift, you're like people look at you not just funny, they look at you in anger and rage of how could you possibly not love Taylor Swift? And I'm like,
that's Florence right now.
I'm
with
just sick of her right now, dude. I'm sorry. She's everywhere and everybody says that I need to love her. And I'm not into it.
Agreed. That's Florence with like any new artist. They're like, oh my God, you haven't heard of blah, da, 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 da.
Gotcha.
And then she's like, okay, like every 5 minutes you're telling me about a new person. I understand Michelangelo's incredible. His sculpture's incredible. He even has drawings of it. But he's like, just let's take a chill pill on this, okay?
Yeah. T. Swift, inarguably one of the biggest artists of all time. I'm just kind of sick of it.
Yes. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. And do not assassinate us. We do love Taylor Swift. That was a total lie.
I have no ill will against her. She's actually my favorite. Look at my record collection. It's nothing but Taylor Swift, if you noticed.
I'm seeing it's all Taylor Swift
all
here.
All of it.
Daniel is safe. So immediately after this, Michelangelo would be commissioned to paint a fight scene that would complement Leonardo's Battle of Anghiari only a few feet away, which is where the rivalry would finally take hold, which was no twist of fate. Florence's leaders all knew that the two did not like one another and decided to pit themselves against one another to force them both to make the best work possible. While Da Vinci was merely irritated by Michelangelo, Michelangelo took this as an opportunity to smack down the old man, with a contemporary writing, quote, "To stage a competition with Leonardo, the Signoria had assigned Michelangelo that other wall where, in order to conquer him, he began to paint." The painting, called the Battle of Cascina, was meant to depict a war fought in 1394 when Florence took control of Pisa, but instead, for reasons any armchair psychologist could guess, Michelangelo took a different approach, painting the moment the soldiers were told that they were being attacked, which was conveniently when they were all naked with their big wet muscles being in the Arno River.
I was going to say, like, the first thing I noticed when I looked at this picture is this dude has got his butt full on display, and he's like, what's going on back here, sailor?
a little bit, yeah. They're like, depict us a battle scene. It's like, what if the soldiers were like, I don't know, like, they weren't like, okay, they're soldiers, yeah, but they're like not fighting. They're just like, naked.
Now learning what I've learned about Michelangelo,
I'm not gay.
This definitely reeks of sexual repression.
Oh, so strong.
Of like, bro, come on.
And
like,
I think Da Vinci kind of knew that, and like he was just like, oh, hon, it's okay. It's okay. Love yourself a little bit.
Right? He's like, Michelangelo's like, I shall never touch a woman, but check out these booties.
Yeah. Da Vinci, now older and less inclined to sass, rarely spoke out against someone else's art. But this was an exception. Without mentioning Michelangelo's name directly, he critiqued the anatomical painter, writing that his awkward understanding of rendering muscles in 2D made the subjects look, quote, like wood, devoid of grace so that you would think you're looking at a sack of walnuts rather than the human form. Which is kind of true. If you look at it, they look like a sack of walnuts. They're so lumpy. And that's like, now when I look at the Sistine Chapel, I see that too.
Oh my gosh, you're totally, it's like, it's like in cartoons when they're overly muscly.
Yes.
And you're like, hang on, like if anyone's ever seen Baki or Baki Hanma.
Yeah.
That's what it reminds me of.
I bet you Michelangelo would have loved Baki. Or like JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, he would have ate that shit up.
It's like they'll flex their back muscles and it turns into a face. You're like, that's just not possible.
In Leonardo's eyes, Michelangelo was a bit of a one-trick pony, being famous for painting the male nude and almost nothing else. Da Vinci would write, quote, "The painter should aim at universality. There is a great want of self-respect in doing one thing well and another badly, such as studying the nude figure and nothing else. This is a defect that demands stern reprehension." Leonardo would also write that he believed that painting is more technical than sculpture, with painters having to learn to imbue figures with color, as well as having to use perspective geometry to make a 2D object appear three-dimensional. Yeah, which is kind of an interesting thing. Like, I feel like physically it's more taxing to do sculpture, but I do see Leonardo's perspective of like, once you make the 3D object, all of the light and perspective and distance just does its own thing because it's already in the 3D world. But like to make a 2D object that has color and light and perspective, you have to do something that's not quite as natural.
Totally.
You know?
No, it's sort of weird to hear that, and that's the first time it's occurred to me, because anytime that I see an amazing sculpture, there's an automatic wow to the entire thing. But when you kind of put it like that, yeah, it's weird. It does feel like it's a different sort of way that you have to train your brain to do something that's not natural.
Yeah, like Shalena has been an artist since she was a kid, and she can take any 3D object and turn it into two-dimensional. I cannot do that for the life of me. But if you give me a three-dimensional object, I could probably copy it. I think in 3D. Shalana thinks in 2D, which is really interesting.
I think in neither. I have no skill when it comes to that kind of thing.
Like when I'm building something, I sometimes don't even write plans down because I have a very rudimentary sort of CAD file in my brain of how it's supposed to look. Whereas Shalana can see a 3D object and immediately render it in a flat space, which I just can't do.
My dad is I've told you this before, he's a Disney artist. He does both of those things.
Yeah.
So not only does sculpture, but he does actual painting and drawing and stuff as well. I don't know how he does it, but it's a crazy skill.
Yeah. So Michelangelo would definitely disagree about the whole sculpture being, less technical, but he would kind of secretly agree that he wasn't a great painter. He painted like a sculptor with little regard for studying color and light. While some of his most famous work was painting, he would admit that he liked the chisel more than the brush in his notes, writing, quote, "I am not in the right place, and I am not a painter," during his time in the Sistine Chapel.
Interesting.
Yeah. So now, kind of getting back to the two of them, my favorite part of the rivalry between Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci was, despite the two's differences, they were similar in one way, which was neither of them finished their paintings commissioned for Florence's Plaza. So the two of them are like hating on each other, like, my painting is going to be so much better. And then like around the same year, they both just like stopped working on it.
Now, I will have to say, hearing that gives me a happy heart, and let that be a lesson to all you artists out there that think you're not good enough. One of the greatest artists of all time, who made one of the most iconic and well-beloved and well-seen pieces of art ever in human history.
Said, I am not in the right place. I'm not a painter.
Literally as he was painting it.
Yeah.
Was like, dude, I'm not even a painter. And it's the Sistine Chapel.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing to hear.
Yeah, it's really true. I think that's a really good testament, because I think more artists behave like Michelangelo than they do Da Vinci, which is like that sort of reclusive self-hatred loop, whereas Da Vinci saw it as like a social thing that was like, let's all get together and paint, this is so interesting, let's find out, answer every question, let's get interested. And like, that's awesome, but some people are just not really capable of that type of thought. So it's really important to know that Michelangelo did not think he was a painter, and he still painted the Sistine fucking Chapel. And
also, hearing that, it gives this strange new perspective on Michelangelo being kind of a punk, right?
Oh yeah.
Where you're like, oh, if that's how you were feeling on the inside, you were probably just so insecure and so envious of these other artists like Leonardo da Vinci, where any perceived slight, you snapped back in this really nasty kind of a way. Yeah, you were insecure about yourself.
Yeah, and I think also a part of that comes into being queer, which is like, and obviously like I'm in a sort of straight marriage, right? But I know a lot of friends who, before they came out, would see the openly gay guy at their school and be like, oh, man, I hate that guy. I hate that guy. But really what it is like, oh, that person's living their truth. That person's being honest with themselves in a way that I don't feel like I can. Mm-hmm. And that's where the self-loathing is coming from.
Yep.
And I feel like a big part of Michelangelo's personality is that.
That's why this might get cut out because I don't want to get too political on anybody. Mm-hmm. But I do think it is funny whenever I hear somebody really hating on like drag shows.
Yeah.
It makes me just go like,
super political.
Uh-oh. Is there a little part of you that kind of wishes that you
like,
could
don't
go have fun like that?
I feel like exactly. That's a huge part of it. It's like I saw this on College Humor. They were talking about how drag and WWE wrestling are the same thing.
It kind of is.
It's just like, both gender performance. Both of them are like, in WWE, it's always like super duper macho men, and they have like costume changes and stuff like that. And like, that's okay to like, but then when you flip it over and you think about the time where maybe your big sister played dress up with you or something like that, you were probably taught at some point that is not okay, and then you have sort of that negative reaction. I think Michelangelo also has that a little bit.
Which, shout out to my sister Jessica, she totally did that to me.
Oh, Gavi, 100%. Like every time I'd be like, let's play soldiers, and she's like, okay, you're a lady soldier and you're wearing a tutu, and I'm like, all right. So as for the reason why they stormed away from it, for Michelangelo, he would get called to make a tomb for the Catholic Church in Rome. He was commissioned by Pope Alexander Borgia, and after storming off, complaining that the Pope didn't give him enough respect, he would double back and apologize profusely in the hopes to keep his head.
Ooh.
Yeah, so like he went to Borgia and he was like, oh, you don't get to talk to me like that. And then he was like, oh, wait, I'm talking to Borgia. I should probably go back and apologize immediately so I don't die.
And this was Cesare's dad, right?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah. As for Da Vinci, the reasoning to abandon the painting was mixed, as usual. The first of which is the fact that the painting was not stable. Despite changing the formula he originally used for the Last Supper, after a torrential downpour, the painting began to deteriorate, likely due to some poor quality linseed oil. Another motivation to put down the brush would be the same as what stopped Adoration of the Magi, a need for it to be perfect, despite its dramatic posings and gigantic scale. The final reason seems to be the strongest. While Da Vinci certainly thought Michelangelo was immature and rude, competition just wasn't his nature. After the two entered their little feud, Da Vinci felt uncomfortable with being forced to go toe-to-toe with a young artist full of potential, even if he was a bit of a prick. Either way, just like the Adoration, Leonardo and Michelangelo's rough paintings would go on to be an influence for an entire generation of artists. The two would be on display until 1512, and young artists who would usher in the Baroque era would take the pilgrimage just to see them in their unfinished splendor. Cellini, a sculptor from the time, would write, quote, "So long as they remained there, they served as the school of the world." There was also something else changing in the art world. When Da Vinci was born, unsigned paintings made by dozens of artists would be the standard. But just after their famous Clash of the Turtles, artists were becoming singular sensations. People didn't just talk about Florentine or Venetian art. They talked about Master Leonardo and his rival savant, Michelangelo. Da Vinci had always been popular, but it's at this time that he was so famous that he would even be asked to sign his works. And the same would go for other artists of the time.
Okay.
So now we're getting to a point where anything that Da Vinci made by hand would probably have a signature. And as happy as Leonardo would be to hear that his painting would become the school of the world, he was getting more and more disillusioned by Florence. Like in his 30s, it seems that Da Vinci was treated as some expendable resource, being shot down, working to divert the Arno, and then assigned to try to crush other talented artists, but not allowed to perfect his work due to impatient politicians. The straw that broke the camel's back would come in the way of family drama. On Tuesday, July 9th, Ser Piero da Vinci would pass away at 78 years old, leaving behind 10 sons and 2 daughters. Da Vinci was never legitimized, and his bastard status would be reminded to him when Leonardo would be excluded from any assets his father owned, passing them on to his legitimate family. Jumping forward a few years, in 1507, Piero's more kind-hearted brother, Francesco da Vinci, would do what he could to try to bring Leonardo back into the fold, changing his will to give Leonardo a family property in the countryside of his hometown. Leonardo was really happy to hear this, especially because he often gave money to his uncle to fix up the property. In another effort to shun Da Vinci, the other 9 of his half-brothers would agree with their dear old dad and try to take the property back from Leonardo, even though they really didn't have any right to it because it was their uncle's. That would get him tangled up in legal battles for months. Leonardo, hurt and angry, drafts a letter to his siblings, writing, quote, "You don't wish to repay me the money I lent for the property. You've treated me not as a brother, but as a complete alien." Despite everything he did, all the success he had, it simply wasn't enough to get his father into his life in any real way, besides helping him sign a commission or 2. Luckily for him, he had a way to escape Florence without any repercussions. His excuse came from the Church of San Francisco Grande, who had sued him and Ambrogio de Paredes for the first version of Virgin of the Rocks. If you remember in the last couple episodes, he redid it. Despite the painting being totally finished, the church was trying to avoid paying for it by saying it was never completed, and Da Vinci didn't paint it enough for it to be considered Da Vinci's work. Yeah. Da Vinci was more than happy to redo a painting if it gave him free rein to abandon his battle scene and immediately hop back to Milan to help Ambrogio. As an aside, it would seem that Leonardo would get into thinking about his own legacy, now that he was virtually shunned by his family and had no one to carry the torch. During his first few years back in Milan, Da Vinci would become friends with the Melzi family, who lived in a beautiful home in a small village outside of town. The head of the house, Girolamo, would ask Da Vinci to take on his son Francesco Melzi as an apprentice, working as his most important assistant. Being a proud gay man, Da Vinci had relegated the idea of being a father to something that just wasn't in the cards for him. But something changed when he met Francesco. Da Vinci would adopt him, and Francesco in turn would care for Leonardo until he died, working to preserve and copy everything that his adopted father made.
Oh.
It's because of Da Vinci's son, Francesco Melzi, which he adopted at 55 years old, that most of Leonardo's work still exists.
Really?
Yeah. I didn't really know where to place this because he doesn't become a key character in the sort of overall plot of Da Vinci. But yeah, when he turns 55, he moves to Milan, talks to some of the people who work in Milan's court, and yeah, he basically kind of hits it off with this kid and was like, you know what? I want to make you my heir. Because, like I said, Da Vinci never had the opportunity to kind of keep his legacy going because, to be honest, I'm not even really sure if he ever thought about his legacy. He was just kind of focused on the day-to-day.
Also, back in that time, I mean, being gay, it wasn't like there was this huge adoption process like we have now where you can be like, yeah, we can live a gay lifestyle together. Again, lifestyle, it's not the right way to say it, but you know what I'm saying?
I would
we
say.
can be gay together and, we have options to have a family still.
Yeah.
This feels like, I mean, he probably didn't even have that thought because he was like, well, I'm not procreating, so legacy is not something that I'm thinking of. And then now it kind of got to this point where he's like, hey, that makes sense.
Yeah, he's like, well, I don't have a family anymore. My brothers have very clearly said that I am not a Da Vinci. They have sued me for the rights to land that my family owned. I'm the most famous out of all of them, but you know what? Fuck them. I'm going to start my own family. This is going to be my own sort of little life that I'm going to build in Milan. He was tired of Florence. I think every time he ends up going to Milan, it's because of a sort of a need to reinvent himself or a need to be around people that he actually prefers. The vibes of Florence were great for him to learn, but I think it was sort of just kind of a toxic place for him, if that makes sense.
It reminds me of somebody that would like go back and forth from like a New York City when they're younger, going, oh man, New York is the best. And they go away somewhere else, whatever city it might be, maybe somewhere a little bit more quiet. And they go, this is nice and all, but man, it's not quite like New York. And then they go back to New York and go, dude, New York is not the same as I remember.
Yeah.
And it's like,
everything's expensive. It kind of sucks. Like,
did New York change? Or did you change?
Yes.
And then years go by and they go, dude, I'm out. I can't do New York anymore. And they go back to the place where they were before and they're like, that was actually much nicer. I didn't appreciate it at the time.
Yeah. That's definitely Da Vinci with Florence. Because like I said, it's the artist universe there. It is the home of the arts, but it's also exhausting.
Yeah.
Now, getting back to Da Vinci trying to dodge his obligations again, unfortunately, Florence wasn't going to let him escape that easily and made him sign a contract saying that he'd be back to paint the Battle of Anghiari in 3 months. But Leonardo had another trick up his sleeve. If you remember, King Louis XII loved Da Vinci, and his friend Robert Tet was the one to commission Madonna of the Yarnwinder. So, the French kind of strong-armed Florence into giving back Leonardo, telling him that if they liked Da Vinci so much, they should have taken better care of him. In a letter by Milan's French governor, to paraphrase, they write, quote, "We were among the first who loved him, and after spending time with him..." No, I'm not going to do the accent.
I want you to so bad.
No, I can't do it.
It's so good.
"We were among the first who loved him, and after spending time with him, have been able to see talents that go beyond his skill as a painter, such as his engineering. It would be fitting to give a man of such talent better treatment, no? If you truly appreciate his gifts."
Well done. I liked the accent. No, it was great. In honor of the Olympics that are happening right now.
Yeah.
There you go.
It's good to know the King of France, but even better if you're such a nice guy that they're willing to write royal sealed letters to help you get out of a job you don't like. Aside from the pressures of being a public artist, his annoying half-brothers and the ghost of his father, Da Vinci seemed to want to leave Milan simply because he enjoyed it more. Florence was the center of art, but after Lorenzo died, things just weren't the same. In Milan, however, the presence of French royals turned every day into a parade and every night into a party. The French were trying their best to make Milan the cultural center of the world, so funding for scholars and universities became massive. History was fully repeating itself for Leonardo, and he would take this time to dive into the sciences again, like he did when he first left Florence. One day, Leonardo da Vinci met a man at the hospital who claimed he was 100 years old and had never been sick, even during his younger years when the plague was still active. It was only a few hours after the two of them had this conversation, the old man actually quietly passed away without any movement or sign of distress. The writings, now called the Centenarian, are his most famous dissection studies, with the codex being 30 pages long with incredibly detailed illustrations. What was so impressive about this was mainly due to the fact that formaldehyde hadn't been invented So you can imagine there's only a small window before great-grandpa Mario was a little too pungent to research.
Ugh.
Da Vinci talked about this a lot. He was like, you got like 10 days tops. And honestly, I feel like 10 days is a long time.
I was going to say, that's probably generous.
He's like, you got 10 days tops before that body is done for, unless it's like the middle of winter or something like that, and they can kind of like semi-refrigerate them.
Ugh.
While it may seem like a normal occurrence to most, Da Vinci was puzzled as to why the old man passed, given his incredible health and track record, and he searched to find the cause. Going through his abdominal cavity, spine, and liver, he couldn't find the answer, but the cause of death was revealed to him after studying the cardiovascular system. He was the first to document kind of a weird disease called arteriosclerosis. Arteriosclerosis is a vascular disease where major arteries that carry blood out of the heart begin to stiffen up due to a buildup of plaque. Probably seen this in lots of commercials, 3D animated on, daytime TV.
Yeah, I was going to say, this sounds weirdly familiar.
Yeah. So just to take a step back here, let's remember the actual certified doctors of the time and what they were doing. They were still going with Hippocrates, thinking that there was only 4 juices in the body: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, and all you had to do to get healthy was to balance them out. Surgery was practically out of the question with massive rates of complications, but still, doctors would recommend trepanation for people experiencing headaches. Trepanation, if you don't know, is a fancy word for poking a hole in your skull.
Oh, joy.
For most people, medical interventions started and stopped at simple, harmful, but not helpful home remedies of herbs and alcohol. So for Leonardo to determine the cause of death on a 100-year-old man to be something as nuanced as arteriosclerosis is frankly insane.
It's amazing throughout this series. I feel like I've learned more and more and more that Leonardo is one of the founding fathers of modern medicine.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
In this really bizarre kind of way,
It's wild. And it's because at the time they had dissections, right? And there'd be an assistant dissecting things, and then a couple of people would circle around them. They didn't really do any artwork around it. They would maybe write some like quick notes about how each organ looked and maybe make some hypotheses about it. And then there would be like a lecturer, the head doctor being like, so this is the liver and it does this. But Da Vinci, like I said, as we know, is an artist. So once again, it's just one of those things where his renderings, just the fact that he was able to render it in a certain way, I feel like doctors who would look at those notes would be like, I've seen the cardiovascular system. I have not seen this.
And looking at in your list of images here, you have one of his depictions of the human heart.
Mm-hmm.
It is intense.
It's intense, and it looks like a human heart. It
really does.
There's no interpretations. There's no. Once again, we talk about this, and this is also the problem with illustration a lot of the times, is we don't see with just our eyes. Whenever doctors were writing, diagrams of how the human body worked, they already had their own concepts thanks to people like Hippocrates and folks like that on how things should work, and then that tainted their view of what they were looking at in the human body.
Is it Hippocrates or Hippocrates?
Hippocrates.
Okay.
Yeah, but either way.
For all grammar pronunciation police out there, I know that you're out there and you're going, it's not, it guys.
Yeah.
So, anyway.
So if you're getting a bit squeamish about all the blood and guts, or are just dumbfounded by Leonardo's skill like I am, Da Vinci would understand. His work was hard, and there's no wonder most doctors didn't do it. To paraphrase, in his codex, he writes, quote, "You will perhaps be deterred by your stomach, and if this does not deter you, you may be deterred by the fear of living through the night hours in the company of flayed corpses, fearful to behold. And if that does not deter you, perhaps you'll lack the good draftsmanship that such a picture requires, or the knowledge of perspective or geometry skills, or even the patience to be diligent." Daniel and I were talking about writing a historical figure as they get closer to their gray years and how difficult it can be. From my limited time learning the complete lives of a person, it seems that the first third is understanding a foundation, their childhood or lack thereof, and their schooling or their pursuit of their identity. Close to someone's 30s tends to come a make or break moment where they solidify their character or, like Leonardo, endeavor to reinvent themselves. As we get to someone's 50s, it seems like people take time to expound on the things that make them who they are, whether it's writing about clandestine stories in James Bond or diving even deeper into the inner workings of human beings. As a history lover, this is my absolute favorite to read, but it becomes difficult to write for an audience since it sounds like more of the same thing when you have to sum up what he's doing. Leonardo is answering the big questions on what makes us human and asking every silly question that we take for granted, like what muscles make someone smile or what nerve system compels us to cry. For those of you who have fell in love with Da Vinci enough to read more about him, I'll leave the fascinating little details of his discoveries for you to find in Walter Isaacson's book. But for the casual listeners, I'll sum up the most pivotal discoveries he makes in the second time he spends in Milan. Da Vinci would successfully dissect the facial muscles and assign each function with an accuracy we won't see in centuries. He would disprove the idea that the liver is the central system that orchestrates blood flow, using humanist philosophy to compare the heart of a human to a nut that spreads roots and branches out from itself.
Oh, wow.
As for the heart itself, he would make one of the most important discoveries in medical history, proving that there are 4 ventricles that pump our blood, and using his love for swirling waters to describe the function of the aorta. Da Vinci was not one to dwell on nostalgia, but he would return to the fascinations he had as a wide-eyed, beautiful student in Verrocchio's shop when he explores engineering and the movements of water, now with gray hair, which is where we'll pick up for part 7 of Leonardo da Vinci.
Boo.
I know.
Boo this man.
Yeah, like I almost wish that I went into his medical studies more here than I did when he first went to Milan. But then again, he was asking very fundamental questions in Milan, like, describe an eyeball, describe a heart, describe a brain, and drawing that out. And now he's coming back to what he kind of abandoned with anatomy and asking the deeper questions, like, how the hell did he figure out how the aorta works? And it was very accurate, too. If you look at his drawings, because of his understanding of hydrodynamics, because he was trying to fly, because he wanted to fly, he studied water. And because he studied water, he knew how blood would work. And now he understands how the heart works as a result of that.
It's insane.
And it's just like, man, I understand that the world has gotten very complicated and there is so much research in each branch that if you just studied one thing, it would take your entire life. But I do miss the idea of the universal man, of the Renaissance man.
Sure.
Because the conclusions that Da Vinci comes to studying medical science are a direct result of all of the other studies that have nothing to do with that.
Sure.
Like he's a hydraulics engineer in some ways. A hydraulics engineer would have a very different understanding of blood flow than a doctor because they have a full foundation on hydrodynamics that doctors maybe don't.
Sure. Just for modern times, it's going to be definitely different because
we can build off of foundations of other discoveries.
It was like it just gets narrower and narrower and narrower. He was at a point where he was going, we don't understand any of this.
No.
And in order for us to understand any of this, I'm going to come to these conclusions naturally because of the things that I'm studying outside of this. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And like, for instance,
it is amazing though.
Like they knew that the liver had something to do with blood, so they just assumed that that's where blood was produced. That's where blood is filtered out, and toxins and stuff are filtered out of the body. That's what that does. But at the time, they thought that was the source of blood, and Da Vinci was like, no. And the reason why he said no wasn't because of other previous medical experience or whatever, but he was using humanist philosophy, and he was like, the heart has to be the center of the blood system. Because if you look at a tree, a seed, like a walnut or something like that, that is the core of where the trunk of the tree shoots up and the roots of the tree shoot down.
Right. It starts the heart of this thing, which is the
heart,
acorn, the nut.
But at the time, that would be considered the liver of the thing.
That's crazy.
It's so weird.
I didn't know that was that people had so much. I mean, I know the liver is very, very important, but I didn't think that at this time they were going, no, the liver is the central thing.
Yeah.
Everything.
I'm not sure if Da Vinci ever figured out that it was bone marrow that produces blood. I want to say that that's the case. I'm not sure if he ever figured that out, but he did realize that the central sort of pump of the vascular system was the heart, and also that there were 4 different sort of quadrants of the heart that pump blood, the ventricles, right?
Super interesting.
So I would highly recommend for anybody who really wants to deep dive into Da Vinci's sort of cadaver studies, specifically the Centenary, and Walter Isaacson's book is incredible. There are so many juicy little details that, like, if I got into it, I think the people who aren't that interested would either be squeamish or like, okay, we can move on.
Like me, I'm pretty squeamish about that stuff.
But for the people who are interested and can kind of stomach it, like, I read this and there's a part of me, and I've always kind of like wanted to hop careers, you know, that's just kind of part of my personality, but there's part of me and I'm like, I want to be a doctor now. Like,
no.
And I'd make my mother so proud. I'd be a nice Jewish doctor.
It's true.
She'd be so
all
happy.
mothers, really, not just Jewish mothers too.
No,
I think any
for
parent,
sure.
you know, it's like you go to people that are from anywhere in Asia, China, Japan,
True.
India. People are just like, oh man, if my kid became a doctor, it'd be like the proudest thing.
I think it's also like specifically like an immigrant thing, because they're like,
Ooh,
that's the
very,
fastest way to get rich
that's
in
a good
a
point.
new country is like be a doctor.
And to get respect.
Yes.
You know, although it does remind me of Aziz Ansari. He was saying that when his father moved to America, they moved to New Jersey, is where Aziz Ansari grew up.
Mm-hmm.
He was saying that there was like a thing at the hospital that anytime a new doctor was hired on, all of the other doctors would take the doctor out to dinner, but they did not do that for his father.
Ooh, that's sad.
Who is from India and had a thick Indian accent. That just bummed me out.
Yeah, that's so sad.
But also that was back in like the whatever it was, early 80s, where people were...
Yeah.
I mean, look, people are still racist, but they were, I think, a lot more openly racist back then.
Maybe.
And sort of weirdly proud to be racist in a way.
Yeah.
I don't know. Well, anyways, I think that's going to do it for this episode. A couple of closing notes here. Again, for anybody that is able to support the show, hopefully you are enjoying it as you listen through our different series here. If you could support us on Patreon, we'd obviously love any and all help that we can get. That's going to be patreon.com/thebiographers. You can also find us on our various social media platforms. We're on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. I always say this, we're on Facebook, but barely. If you really want us on there, let us know. I don't really care, to be honest. Most of those are just going to be at The Biographers, YouTube, TikTok, except for Instagram. That is going to be at the.biographers. Next thing, go check out Metalwork by Miola. That is Akiva's website here. His last name is spelled Meola. Again, that's Metalwork by Miola. That's for all your chef's knife needs and really most forms of knives. He can make you most things.
I just got a commission for a sword this week.
Did you?
Yeah.
What kind of sword?
Kind of like a hybrid between, it's for a HEMA practitioner, actually, historical European martial arts. He's going to the same school that I went to. And he wants sort of a half Chinese sort of curved blade, half falchion, which is the swords that were featured in Battle of Anghiari.
Cool.
And he wants it like to be like almost kind of tactical and sort of new age, which could be fun. It's a little bit more technically challenging, but also the fit and finish will be simpler. So I'm excited.
Cool. Well, hey, if there are any HEMA practitioners out there or any of those other various martial arts that require any type of swords or whatever, hit up Akiva. He can almost definitely make you that stuff.
They're blunt for fencing or sharp for, doing cutting practice. I can do it.
I also know that Otto, one of the other blacksmiths in the shop, he has made, what are those things? Maces in the past.
Oh, yeah. We have an awesome class for that.
Big spikes and stuff. So anyhow, all different types of crazy stuff that they can make for you there. And if you do use the code biographers at checkout, you can get 10% off of your order.
And I will honor that with commissions as well, even if you're not ordering something from the website.
Hey, there you go. I like it. And last but not least, any questions, comments, or corrections, please shoot us an email at thebiographerspodcast@gmail.com. We do try to do any type of corrections or updates that we come across, or if we ask questions to ourselves along the way, we answer those in our office hours episodes. So anybody that has questions for us, or again, corrections, or just things that you want to say, shout outs or whatever, shoot us an email at thebiographerspodcast@gmail.com. Anything else?
Nah, man. I hope you guys are enjoying this. I'm gonna go into a little bit further the reading and see how I want to play out the next episode. The next episode might be one more episode of just further content towards the end of his life, or we might wrap it up. So I hope you guys stay tuned because it's gonna get exciting.
Yes, I'm excited to hear where it all goes.
Yeah.
Well, thanks everybody for listening. Like I always say at the end of our episodes here, remember, ignorance is not stupidity, it is the absence of knowledge. And I do hope you all learned something today.
Bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to The Biographers. For more information, please visit thebiographerspodcast.com.